Hello, I'm Dr. Dan Hale, co-director of the Congregational Depression Awareness Program here at Johns Hopkins. Today, I'm joined by the Reverend Pamela Yerby Hammock, executive pastor at the City of Abraham Church and Ministries here in Baltimore, who has offered to share some of her experience with depression. So first, welcome, Pam. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thank you, Dr. Hale. I am happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me to share.
Good. All right, well, let's start by my asking you to just tell us what your first experience, your first episode of depression was like.
Well, I can tell you it was scary, and it was a very, very dark time in my life. I would say that it's something that I never really had experienced before. It was unexpected, out of the blue. I definitely wasn't expecting that. And as I began to do research about my sickness during that time, I found out that the National Alliance on Mental Illness, they actually identified 9 symptoms that could possibly mean that a person has depression. And out of those 9, I know for sure that I had 7 of them and possibly 8. The first symptom they list has to do with changes in sleep. And I definitely had that, changes in my sleep. I had a difficult time often going to sleep. And then if I was able to fall asleep, then I would wake up around the same time every night, around maybe about 3 or 4 o'clock. And then I would be unable to go back to sleep. Also, changes in appetite is one of the symptoms, and I definitely had that. A loss of appetite. I love to eat. I love food, but I found that I just couldn't eat. I couldn't even force myself to eat. And at that time, I was really kind of afraid that I had developed an eating disorder. And as a result of not being able to eat well, I lost quite a few pounds. I lost about 10 pounds during that time. Another symptom was the lack of concentration. Well, I was at that time working at my place of employment for over 25 years, loved what I did, was always pretty good at what I did, but I had lost concentration so bad. And then I was unable to actually go to work for about 2.5 months because I just couldn't concentrate. And even when I tried to have work brought home, I thought, well, maybe I could work at home, but that wasn't working either. I just couldn't concentrate. I was also in school at that time. I was in seminary working to get my Master of Divinity. But I had to drop all of my classes again because I couldn't concentrate. And I also couldn't keep up with my household responsibilities. For some time, even though I didn't know it, my surroundings began to reflect probably the clutter in my own mind. And so my home was becoming very cluttered. It was hard for me to just keep up with those things. I also had a loss of energy where I didn't feel like doing much of anything, really. And that's probably what I did. If I could have stayed in bed, I probably would have, but I did force myself to get up. I lost interest in activities, which is another one of the symptoms. And one of the things that I love to do, probably most in all the world, I guess, since I've been called to this ministry, is to preach. And I felt like I didn't even want to do that anymore. I remember I had completed my last preaching assignment of the year, and I was actually relieved. I usually can't wait until someone invites me to come again, but I was really relieved. And I remember sitting in the library, afraid to get out of the chair that I was in. And I got a call, somebody invited me to preach, and I was so afraid and I didn't want to do it. And I remember that I did express my unwillingness even to God and just ask, why. I was so happy that I didn't have to go again. And I don't remember that I've ever done that before because I do like to preach so much. I also like to go to church. That, that's part of my life. I love being around my family and those kinds of things, but I just lost the enjoyment to do those things. Again, like I said, I love to eat, didn't want to do that anymore. I don't remember if I was doing much watching movies because I love movies and love to read. Can't remember about that, but I probably didn't do much of that as well. My thoughts were all over the place. I had this hopelessness or guilty thoughts. I began to think really that I was not going to get out of this, especially since I didn't even know what it was at first. But some of the thoughts were like, your family doesn't support you. You don't have any friends. People don't love you like that. And I know that they weren't the truth. I know they were all lies because I've been blessed with good family and good friends for many years, but I just couldn't stop them. Then I had like unstoppable thoughts, just ruminating on one thing over and over and over. And it just seemed like I couldn't get it out of my mind. I did see some changes in my movement. With this episode, I believe it was probably maybe brought on or helped or propelled me into this depression, maybe because I had a fall, an unexplained fall, don't know what had happened. And so as a result of that, I was afraid that that was going to happen again. So I didn't want to move. I didn't want to walk. And when I did, I began to shuffle along. So I really wasn't walking properly. I would just shuffle. And my daughter also told me that I had become pretty irritable in the months leading up to my depressive episode. I hadn't realized it, but when she said that, I could remember times being in the restaurant where I wasn't as kind to the server or something. And she would say, "Mommy, why'd you do that?" And then finally, and the one, so I definitely, those 7 things I definitely had. The one that's a possible is I had been experiencing more cramps in my feet. That's something that I would get all the time anyway from standing a lot. But it seemed like I had been getting more foot cramps and cramps in my legs as well. I'm grateful that I didn't struggle with suicide thoughts, but I think during that time I was thinking about death a lot, not necessarily my own, but maybe death of my family members.
Right. Well, obviously that's a very painful, difficult time. Where did you turn for help? And what did you find when you did ask for help?
I suppose the first place I went to was maybe my family. I reached out to my daughter, first of all. And but professionally, the first place I went to was my primary care physician because I didn't know what was happening. And because of this fall, my daughter and my husband thought it was a good thing that I should see my primary care doctor to find out where this even came from. So as a result of that, there were no medical things found. Vital signs were good when I got there. He sent me to get scans to make sure that there were no blood clots. But it was also evident that something wasn't right with me. And the nurses and the clerks in the doctor's office and the doctor themselves, they couldn't believe how I looked. How my face presented itself. They could tell that there was definitely, I wasn't the same person who would always come into their office. It was very evident. So I went to him first. And after finding out nothing was medically wrong, and after talking to him and he talking to me about, life, and I guess he probably thought I may have been having some suicidal thoughts or ideations. He tried to, help me get through that. But I did tell him that I really wasn't afraid to die, but I was afraid to live, not to die by suicide, but just to be able to live. Those are the things that became very fearful to me. Taking care of my hygiene, going to school, going to work, just moving about was very fearful. He did give me, did prescribe, I believe it was Zoloft. He said it was something that was tried and true, something that had been around for a while. And I took the one dose. Unfortunately, I had a panic attack that night. And that sent me to the ER. As a result of it, I just said, I'm not taking that anymore. And, and I did it. From there, I think I probably saw a workplace counselor because I began to feel like there was something mentally and or emotionally that was the issue. So I went to see them. The counselor did believe that I was exhibiting signs of depression, but I don't feel that he was very helpful because I thought that he would probably give me some referrals to show me where I could go to receive some help. But instead, he sent me to the internet. And I just couldn't even concentrate enough. As much as I'm on the internet and love researching things, I couldn't even concentrate enough to even handle that task. Plus, this was an unfamiliar place for me. I didn't know anything about psychiatrists, psychologists, what's the difference, therapists, counselors, or whatever. And I began to think, do you really know how many mental health professionals are in your city? How can I figure out which one and the different ones? Should I go to a Christian place? Whatever. I mean, I didn't know. So my daughter helped me, but again, that was very frustrating and that didn't yield any results. Finally, my daughter talked to a representative from my insurance company, and they mentioned Shepherd Pratt Hospital, which is, of course, in our city and not far, and has a good reputation. And so I did that particular day. I went into their crisis center, and after the intake, the psychiatrist thought that I would do well by being part of the adult day program. The process of all of that, just trying to get the help, lasted about a month, trying to decide what was wrong with me, where to go if I did that, and trying to get me to that place. But I can definitely say that I was, being in the crisis of my life, that adult day program was just what I needed, really. All of the professionals there were a big help in my recovery. And I was also prescribed some helpful medications, which worked well for me.
So are you still taking any medication or involved in any treatment?
I do take medication. I take the medication that I was given for anxiety. That was short-lived, about 6 months. And then I was taking medicine for depression. My husband died about 2 years after that depressive episode. And the anniversary of his death, I began to slip back into a depressive and state, and with the anxiety and the panic. But I had weaned off my medications thinking that I was well. But after I relapsed, the next year I did go back on the medications, and I've been on them ever since. Now I've been, I just saw a therapist a few months ago, but she says that really I'm in a place of remission. There's no signs of depression. And I've decided to just stay on a low dose of medication that I take.
Okay. I'm very curious, what role has faith played in your recovery? And also, how have other people of faith responded to you and your depression? And are some of those responses helpful, and have some been not so helpful?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, faith is a big part. It's a big part. My relationship with God is everything to me. Has been for a really long time. I've been a follower of Jesus ever since I was in my early 20s. I come from a family of believers. Spiritual disciplines like church, reading the Bible, studying the Bible, meditating on the Bible, have always been a large part of my life. So in the time of my depressive episode, because I had lost the ability to enjoy those things that gave me pleasure, I found those things hard to do. I really did. And so I I just didn't have any desire to practice those disciplines that I'd always done. But once I received the treatment, I found it easier to go back into that place. So what I have done now and what I constantly do, those helpful scriptures that remind me of God's love, God's presence, his ability to help me get through whatever I have to get through. I keep them posted in places where I can see them and read them often, remind myself of them, meditate on those things. Also, I've always been blessed with a really good support system. My family and my friends have been really good. And even when I was in that depressive episode, if people didn't quite even understand what I was going through, they did what they could to support me. Now, my husband, who is a man of faith, really a man of faith, he didn't think that I needed to see any mental health professionals. He came from the school that, prayer is enough. He knew that I was a woman of faith, and the fact that I was a preacher too, he seemed to think that that was all that I really needed to get through this. So he was very resistant. Even when my daughter was on the phone with the representative from my insurance company to try to find some place to get this help for me, he was not feeling it at all. He was very resistant to get me that help because he was convinced. He was convinced that all I needed right then was prayer. He didn't understand that why I didn't want to pray. He didn't understand that, concentration was hard for me. He didn't understand why the scriptures that I may have loved, known, and stood on all my life just weren't doing for it. But he did, however, support me when he saw that I was just going to go get help anyway. He did support me. He would ride me around because I couldn't drive. I was too afraid to even drive. So he would make sure that I got to my appointments on time and picked me up as well. One of my sisters, the night before I was supposed to be admitted into the program, she advised me, don't take any of those medications. And to which I agreed. And I was like, oh no, I won't. Because, like too many other people, we didn't trust psych meds. We always heard just bad things about them. And I just thought that they would do me more harm than good. And even when I got there, I was insistent, I don't want to take any meds. But of course, that didn't work. And now I'm so grateful that they didn't listen to me, that the doctors did what they knew was best. I became very codependent on my daughter. She was very supportive. And then she even changed many aspects of her lifestyle in order to do what I needed to do, because I was so helpless in a lot of places because of my fear and the anxiety. And then others of my family and my Christian friends, they were there to pray when I couldn't pray. Some were even fasting for me. They would call me, text me, or whatever. And the first time that I talked about my depression in a church service, I received so much support from friends and from my church members, and many of them opened up, and they were finally able to admit their own personal struggles. There were some people that when I told that story, they would say, well, don't speak those things. You're delivered, or whatever. You don't need those medications. You'll be off them soon. And it was because they didn't really have a proper understanding. They loved me, and I believe that what they said came from a good place, but it was because they just didn't understand.
Well, so let me ask you then, what advice would you have for someone who thinks they might be depressed, or perhaps have a loved one who they think might be depressed? What sort of advice, guidance would you offer?
Well, for someone who is who may feel they're depressed, the first thing I would say is just admit that it's okay not to be okay. We're not superhuman beings, whether we're people of faith or even if we're not people of faith. If we are not superhuman beings. And there are different places where we may suffer or struggle in our lives. My particular sickness was depression. And also for people of faith, know that clinical depression is not a moral failure. It's not a death sentence, and it's also not a loss of your faith. There are many people who can help us, and recovery is possible. And I had to begin to change my perception of what I was going through. I had to really learn that that my faith was still intact and that God was faithfully leading me and helping me in this dark place. And He had provided people who could help me, you know, to get through this darkness and now finally get to the light. And to those who are walking with a loved one or suppose that a loved one may be depressed, I think the best thing that you can do for them is just to be there to help them get through it. It's going to require sensitivity on your part to help them get through that painful place. You don't have to understand what they're going through. Even if they try to tell you, one, they probably can't explain it. I don't think I was able to explain it. And if they could explain something, you probably wouldn't know it, wouldn't know what they're going through. So just be sensitive to what they're going through. It also might require some sacrifice on your part. Like my daughter, you may have to step in to do certain things that the depressed person cannot do for themselves. It's not that they're lazy. It's not that they don't even want to do it. It's just that they have lost that ability, the drive, the physical drive, the mental stamina, the emotional grit to even just get through it. Also, you finally just need to just support them, help them to get the help that they need. Don't pressure them. And many times they may be resistant, probably more often than not. People will just say, nope, 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 I don't need it. I don't want it. Don't pressure them. But if they are resistant at first, just be patient and look for another time to try to persuade them again. Also, remember, and I think this is for both the care receiver and the caregiver, remember that recovery is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not going to happen. The depression probably didn't come overnight, and it's not going to leave overnight. It may be something. Some people have one depressive episode. I thank God so far I've only had one depressive episode, and that may be the only one I ever have. Well, maybe 1.5 because I kind of slipped back, but and it may be that you have to do what you have to do, like I am taking meds to help me so that I can live the best life possible.
Well, let me thank you, and on behalf of everyone who will hear this, for sharing so well, sharing your story and the advice you've offered. I know you've developed a good ministry around this, and I'm glad for that, and want to encourage you. So thanks again.
Well, I just want to say, I want to say thank you, Dr. Hale, again, for allowing me to share my story. And I do hope someone is helped. And because this is part of the Congregational Depression Awareness program, I can say that there has been good that has come out of this story, because I would not even be a part of this if I had not gone through what I went through. So I'm grateful.
Thank you. Take care.